Walt, it's the day after Halloween, but we're recording the day before Halloween. And the Halloween week in the autonomy markets was big. Uber announced that they're going to deploy the Lucid vehicles, Nuro, starting first in San Francisco, Waymo's own backyard. We had a pretty, I'll call it a major pivot from Aurora. And then Jensen gets on stage, he gives a talk, and what happens? Stocks start moving. What do you make of Jensen's announcements at GTC and the market impacts that they had?
Yep. When NVIDIA talks, obviously everyone has to listen. And it was in the middle of earnings week, but we had to focus on it. They had a lot to say. They had some 6G stuff on the wireless side, but autonomy played a big role. And there was a slew of press releases. Of course, we always have to delve through those press releases because, a lot of times you have, CEOs that just want to have their name on a press release with NVIDIA. It's that halo effect that's very positive for them. And on the reverse side, NVIDIA, I think for a long time has wanted to get into automotive. And I think you know that better than anyone. As I recall, in that deep library that you have, you spoke to someone at NVIDIA back in as early as 2021, I believe, when Hyperion, which is this big, automotive stack, was just shifting from doing level 2 plus, which is like ADAS, to level 4. Tell us a little bit more about that.
A lot of things have changed since then. That gentleman was name was Danny Shapiro, who's the general manager for the automotive business. And I called the circuit back in the day. This is the early days of autonomy, and a core group of us would get together and go to every autonomy conference. And Danny was always there talking about automotive. And it was, I don't want to be rude, but it was kind of it was the forgotten child. It wasn't out front. And then one year, I don't remember the year, a few years ago at CES, Jensen goes on stage and does a deal with Mercedes, does a deal with Volkswagen. Said, holy cow, wow, it's of interest. So it's really come a long way since those early days of Danny going from conference to conference talking about what the GPU can do.
Also, that's come a long way is Hyperion, and obviously the demand for the GPUs that NVIDIA provides and AI being on top of that. I mean, think about the concept of AI in 2021 versus today. So now everyone wants to theoretically have that compute on there. So all these list of companies, when you think about Hyperion, it's the buying the GPU. It's maybe an operating system. Maybe if you really want to do something with them, a sensor stack. And I guess now like a fourth layer to this, which is, and which may be the case with Stellantis, where NVIDIA maybe wants to be the actual autonomy provider themselves. So they in effect become the competitor to companies like Nuro or Wave that are purchasing compute for them and putting their own systems on top of that.
They're getting interesting. The Stellantis contract is 5,000 vehicles. The other interesting part of that, Foxconn is going to be the integrator, but you talk about this all the time. So Stellantis is going to build it. NVIDIA is going to, quote unquote, power the autonomous driving system. It's going to go on the Uber network. But who's going to own the asset? We don't know that yet. Who do you think is going to own this asset?
I assume that Uber will purchase the cars, and ultimately, like maybe Stellantis wants to do a private, ownership or private sale of these things. But again, the key issue here is not that; it's that is NVIDIA going to become a competitor to Nuro and Wave? And at the same time, while Wave, as an example, will go out there and purchase that Thor chip because it's very powerful. But the other thing that Wave has talked about is like, hey, our models are so good, they'll work on Qualcomm GPUs. Not to say that Qualcomm GPUs are any worse, but like part of the Wave pitch has been it'll work on any compute. So it's not like there's some companies that are going to use parts of what NVIDIA is offering. My question is like, let's fast forward 2 years from now, and you want to deliver 30,000 cars into a Robotaxi fleet or on the market. And you're Nuro or you're Wave, and like let's say you're using Thor, and you say, hey, send me my 30,000 Thor, and NVIDIA's like, well, maybe we want to use those 30,000 Thor in Stellantis because they're using our full stack for autonomy. If that's what they're doing with Stellantis, I mean that press release isn't exactly fully detailed on that topic.
I'll say it point blank. Your supplier is going to become your competitor. When and if that happens, it's going to come down to one thing. This is a Waltism. Does the technology work? Is the NVIDIA autonomous driving stack far superior than other stacks in the market? If it is, then boy, oh boy, watch out as they look to rack up and gain market share.
And for anyone out there that says like, hey, you guys are crazy to say NVIDIA is going to do their own autonomy stack, take a look at Grayson. He's wearing his Inspector Clouseau hat on for Halloween. And he was the one, at least for me, maybe others out there figure this out as well, but unveiled in some court documents that, they were looking at purchasing Zoox, so this full stack. So it's not like there's not evidence that NVIDIA has an interest in owning the full stack.
The reason I would say to go down 20 layers, watch the developer community. Look to see if developers start to write software on other chips. And if they do, that's an indicator that NVIDIA is looking to compete, because those developers are looking to hedge their bets potentially.
The other thing is here, let's go back to Wave. They're dealing with Qualcomm. I mean, I think Qualcomm had some announcement this week as well, right? It's not like NVIDIA is necessarily going to be the only player in this market.
Qualcomm's developing a GPU, and there's a gentleman, a famous hacker, George Hotz, the first person to ever hack the PlayStation, that sent I'll call it the infamous letter to NHTSA administrator Mark Rosekind, where he basically told Mark to insert your favorite four-letter words here, and he's been talking about it for a long time. But the issue why Qualcomm has not been adopted in the market is the software running on it. So perhaps that changes with this new GPU announcement. And then let's not forget the 10,000-pound gorilla in the market, Google. Can those TPU tensor chips, can those power vehicles? That's something to watch. So there's potentially competition emerging in the market.
And the other kind of, it's funny that you bring up Google, because obviously you think about Waymo and Tesla, like they're using their own GPUs, right? They're not using any of this OS or any of the stack. So maybe NVIDIA can provide this kind of base level compute and OS for a lot of the other competitors out there. But again, that sounds nice and pat, but I'm kind of more in the Wave camp of like, if you're dealing with an OEM and you have to make that compute decision in conjunction with the OEM, especially if you're doing a privately owned car, like those OEMs aren't necessarily going to want to have to rely on that, or maybe it's the expense or the power or whatever it is. They're going to want to look at they have existing relationships, whether it's Qualcomm or others that are in the market. So it should be interesting. But again, give NVIDIA their due. They're kind of the hot company in the moment that everyone wants to be associated with.
To further validate your point, Walt, last week, GM announced their own computing platform. So there are multiple signs in the market.
Let's shift to Uber and drama that you and I have debated whether they're doomed or not. I think we've both been on either side of the argument, and specifically with their relationship with Waymo, which hit its peak in March of this year when Austin had launched. It was a joint market, Waymo and Uber. Everyone's quoting these great stats. These guys are a match made in heaven. And then soon thereafter, Waymo launches markets without Uber. In fact, in July, they announced Dallas, which is Uber had already said that they were going to do with AV Ride. And then in October, they announced London, which Uber had already said that they were going to do with Wave. So Waymo was kind of, in a way, signaling or just doing what they were doing, right, which was expanding their market. So for the first time, we had it happen the other way. In this case, Uber says this week, we're going with Nuro, an autonomy company that you and I both know well, have great respect for. They are going to launch by the end of 2026 in San Francisco. Of course, all of our listeners know San Francisco is the big market for Waymo. I mean, is this the drama playing out to an exaggerated form between these two companies, Grayson?
Me? You don't need your Clouseau hat to figure this out. They're heading to divorce court. And when they divorce, the question is who gets what assets? And by the assets, I mean the Austin market and the Atlanta market. What's going to happen in divorce court when it happens? Then I want to see what happens while Dara's out there, Andrew McDowell's out there. You need Uber to generate rides. We're going to have 3 markets. We're going to have London, we're going to have Dallas, and we're going to have San Francisco that could potentially blow up that narrative. If that narrative is blown up and they do head to divorce court, how does the market react?
Just quickly on the divorce court, because it made me think of what Lyft has talked about in their relationship, where they share one Waymo fleet, where in the case in Phoenix, you basically have a Waymo fleet for Uber and a Waymo fleet for Waymo One. I don't know if it's, again, a complete divorce. But again, the other thing was DoorDash, right? The Waymo DoorDash partnership was also kind of another signal here. Now let's look at it from Nuro's standpoint. Because Nuro would say, let's play down the drama, right? We are a San Francisco-based company. We know this market, very well. That's where we're based. This is a huge, rideshare market. These are the reasons that San Francisco was picked as the first market. But again, it takes two to tango here. So if you're Uber and and you were still trying to manage that relationship with Waymo, it just seems curious to decide, because at the end of the day, Uber is going to probably have the more influence in that decision, more so than Nuro. Why they wouldn't have picked a different market if there wasn't more going on here.
The answer, go back 10 years, 12 years, that you would hear, and it's consistent to this day, it's the market the engineers want because they live there. That's their home market. That's the market they want. But you bring up a valid point. In my humble opinion, Uber carries more clout in that relationship because according to the SEC docs, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to retool the Lucid factory to build these vehicles. So obviously they have more clout. To me, that's a shot across the bow. Okay, so you're going through a divorce. Well, hey, I'm home with a new younger woman. Holy crap. That's what that says to me.
And also, I don't think Nuro's going to be too sad about this. I mean, if there is a fraying of the relationship between Waymo and Uber, that just means more opportunity for Nuro. And I also saw, I think Jay-Z got his delivery of his Lucid car, which looks like a great car. They've recently closed on, I think, another 200 million in August in terms of financing, and obviously making a lot of good progress. So great news for them.
Great news, yes. But the next thing I want to see, and this is all hypothetical, is LA the next market to be announced? Because they'll go boom, boom, Waymo's two biggest markets back to back. That would be something interesting to watch if it does happen.
For LA, I don't know. I mean, what is the manufacturing capacity of Lucid? As you know, my big criticism of this industry is the challenge of getting enough cars on the market, and how quickly can Nuro upfit or otherwise, build these things to fit what they need in San Francisco, let alone LA. Meanwhile, in Waymo land, they had their earnings call, the Google had their earnings call, Waymo was brought up. There are obviously our listeners, if I was on that call, a dozen questions our listeners would love to have heard answered by Waymo about the Uber relationship, but a lot of other stuff. Someone ended up asking about Gemini integration. And, while it wasn't my favorite question, it actually was good for us in the podcast because it related to putting Gemini in the car. They talked about the in-car experience, whether it's YouTube TV or Gemini in the car. And I forget what episode it was, but that's exactly what we talked about. Why? Because we got Grok in our Tesla and we're like, when is Gemini going to come in the Waymo? And I think the answer, Grayson, is it's going to be coming in 2026 because of the improved in-car experience for our Waymo riders.
You're right, the improved experience. Then think about this from an Alphabet revenue generation standpoint. You put Gemini in the vehicle, you personalize it, you unlock in-vehicle shopping, you unlock experiences. And on the experiences front, we've gotten photos and videos on Reddit this week that Waymo's looking to expand in LA. And the reason I bring that up is perhaps the Waymo vehicle with Gemini on the inside could replace the TMZ bus because Waymo has sent cease and desist letters to companies operating Hollywood tourism things. So that's a potential. I think there's something a lot bigger about Gemini going in the vehicle that's currently being discussed. And I think it could be one of the best potential ways that Alphabet monetizes Waymo.
I mean, this is like right in your wheelhouse. If you go to Grayson, Brulte, Road to Autonomy, longtime listeners, even before Autonomy Markets, you were talking about, hey, am I going to go to watch the entire Super Bowl, get in a Waymo and watch the entire Super Bowl? Always talking about the in-car experience. Even I think on last week's podcast, you're talking about deals with airlines and things like that. So I'm sure you're just eating this up in terms of opportunities for these companies. Me, I just want them to get more cars on the road.
I'm a happy camper. It validates it. I can't truly wait to see what's unlocked. And as we look towards 28, I can't wait to see when they augment the glass. So that's the next prediction. That's coming next.
You know who's not happy, Grayson, is going to be the citizens of Boston, because again, another thing that we warned about on this very podcast, that Teamsters specifically was providing a dust up, and you had a vote, and I don't know what was the final tallying the vote. Have they banned autonomy in the city of Boston?
They have not banned autonomy yet. If you read the tea leaves, they are going to ban autonomy. So as the city council of Boston looks to ban autonomous vehicles, I will ask you this: will you next ban Dunkin' Donuts? Answer that.
Dunkin' Donuts probably is worse for your health than autonomy. There was some crazy videos of questioning that some of these council people were were asking at the thing. It's sad, and I think look, it's all going to be near term. I've said this before that as autonomy proliferates in other markets and people save lives, then Boston it will come to them at some point, and these people will get voted out of office for basically putting people's lives at risk.
Okay, that's the rational approach. But you're going into a progressive city with an outspoken progressive mayor with no regulatory framework, relatively no heads up. Why make that announcement without having the regulatory in place? Because then you gave them, you're telling the enemy, "Hi, we're going to go here. Okay, let's go stop them." I don't get that blunder.
I think you weren't even talking about Boston there, Grayson. I think you were passively aggressively talking about Seattle, where I think we debated this in a prior podcast where you were saying, "Oh, why would you go into Seattle for those exact talking points that you just went through?" And lo and behold, one of that prediction kind of came true again, because we've already seen now protests in Seattle as well.
We have, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist or Bill Nye the Science Guy to figure this out. If you look at aggregated polling data out of Seattle will tell you Katie Wilson, a 15-year transit advocate who openly, and this is on her website for public consumption, wants to ban the ownership of vehicles in Seattle. You have no regulatory framework. She's going to win in the polls. Why go into that market? So there's a pattern here, Walt. You go into progressive Boston where they don't want you. You go into Seattle where they don't want you. And then what did Waymo do again? They didn't look at the polling data because, unfortunately, I'm very sorry, you're based in New York and there's an election and it's not looking good.
I mean, at some point, you just have to do it, though, Grayson. And, you have to fight the powers that be in order to move progress forward. We're having this debate right now in terms of Warner Brothers. Like, why would Comcast try and or think about buying Warner Brothers and deal with the regulatory scrutiny given their ownership of MSNBC and all the problems they'd have to go through? Because, sometimes if you're a company, you just need to know that you're going to go to court, know that you're going to have to do these battles, realize that it's going to take some time. And, safety is, and the truth is ultimately going to be on the side, and they will get into these markets, whether it's Seattle or Boston, who knows? And it's just too bad for the citizens of those cities that they can't benefit from the greater safety and reliability of these vehicles.
You're right. I would make an argument. Perhaps there's a better way to do it. Perhaps it's doing more community outreach. Perhaps it's doing it part of a coalition of willing companies. Because let's not forget, Motional was born and raised and incubated in Boston. So, and you have MIT there, and you have all these great research labs. So perhaps there could have been a better coalition for Boston. There could have been perhaps a partnership with Zoox in Seattle, since that's Amazon's hometown. So I just think a coalition of the willing can go a long way, as we've seen that in politics.
I don't disagree with you, Grayson. In fact, one of the events, I was talking to Aurora about this week. You had this truck crash in California that was horrific and drove a lot of political conversations about it. But the autonomy industry as a general could coalesce together and talk about how autonomy could have solved that situation. That's precisely the reason, why you need autonomy. If there's a labor shortage and you need, additional drivers, you have autonomy as a solution. Individual companies don't want to identify, obviously, with horrible situations like that, but it is those horrible situations, that autonomy can improve. Like my own daughter, has had incidents, in Ubers with drivers. Thankfully, nothing significant, but there are ugly things that, need to be discussed, perhaps as an industry, versus an individual company that can help this process and maybe educate, the people of Boston or the Congress people of Boston or Seattle or wherever, New York, to help in this process.
I mean, coalitions of the willing. It's how the early days of autonomy started was forming coalitions. And what we saw in Boston, the gentleman advocate for the blind who's doing really great work was accused of being a tech CEO. And then the councilwoman wouldn't listen to him, as the gentleman clearly stated he's doing the good work for the individuals that need mobility freedom. So there's a coalition out there.
Let's shift to Aurora's pivot. They reported earnings this week. They had a new lane. They have these forecasts in terms of number of trucks. And they were supposed to get to tens of trucks by the end of this year. It's 10, not tens. There is a difference. But then when we go to next year, it was supposed to be hundreds, which to me is the lowest version of hundreds is 200. It didn't seem like PACCAR or Volvo were going to be the ones to get them there. So lo and behold, we wake up and page 8 of the investor letter details how they're going to upfit, they're going to buy international trucks basically from dealers and upfit them. What are your thoughts?
It validates everything Don Burnett has been saying since the day he founded Kodiak. Platform agnostic is the way to go as you build a company, and you don't want to be over reliant on an OEM. And I'm reading the tea leaves here, Walt. To me, it's a clear indicator that PACCAR was never going to let them take the safety driver out.
Well, I don't know about that. I still think there's a path that if you go into 2027, when you're talking about hopefully thousands of trucks, that there's still a path for PACCAR. But it's just they weren't going to allow them, I think, for this version until they get to the production version, right, of their car. They wouldn't let them take the safety driver in the upfit version. I think you're right about that. And I think we already knew that. And I think Aurora already talked about that, right? So then you have Volvo, who is delivering them trucks that have the redundancy in a lot of these things. So maybe that wasn't going to get them there for one reason or another. So rather than like upset the apple cart there, you just go and buy some trucks. You add redundancy to their brakes and the variety of things that need to be done, which by the way, puts all the liability, onto Aurora. If anything goes along with the brake, then Aurora is effectively taking, I think they're fine doing that. They do it themselves. Like they're, I think they have the capability over the course of 2026 to upfit 100 or 200 of these international trucks. And then even going into 2027, I think you're probably going to still see them upfitting trucks as they await, getting to the production lines for PACCAR and for Volvo.
But on that earnings call, Chris Urmson said Q2 2026, they're going to go drive route, no safety attendant, no safety driver. And I'm under the assumption, that those will be the international trucks. If that program goes successful and they're able to bring multiple lines on, hundreds upon hundreds of trucks upfitted by international, why not just try and get an OEM deal with international then? Why go back to PACCAR if that proves to be highly successful?
I think these are two different things, and I don't believe that is the intention. And I mean, the other issue is you have Plus AI, who already has a deal for integration, so you'd have to be behind them. It takes a lot of time to do that. It might not be their preferred if they're going to add a third or a fourth integration vendor. It might not be that, that company to do that. On the flip side, by the way, like to me, it's a little bit of an embarrassment for PACCAR that like you're the first guy through the chute, you're the initial partner, and your primary partner, which is a 10 billion plus market cap company, Chris Urmson, well known in the space, and they're going out and buying trucks from dealers. Like, I mean, that's just not a good look for PACCAR either.
It's a horrible look for PACCAR, to be very frank with you. And then it raises the other question: is it too early to get an OEM deal? Should these companies get the fleets up to 500, 600 before you get an OEM deal? Have leverage and do it right? Did the companies rush in too early for OEM deals?
I mean, we've debated this, and early on I was like, hey, I'm still learning the space and all the different models and things, but I mean, this is a hell of a validation for Kodiak, where Burnett was like, look, OEMs move slow. And we've seen that. We saw what happened with PACCAR. Like, let's go out and get the trucks. Let's get revenue. Let's get proof of concept. Like, this is what people want to see. And then as we get to scale, we'll move into those. And that, I mean, kind of looks like that's the right strategy all along. And for those that were telling us before, oh, his stuff is not insured and like you're upfitting, that's not the way to do. You have to integrate with the partner. Like, okay, but now you're doing it yourself. So like you've basically just validated the strategy that Kodiak and Don Burnett had from day one.
And you know what that brings, Walt? Interesting times in the autonomous trucking market.
Absolutely. And look, now Burnett's going to be reporting his own earnings, and you've got, I think, Plus AI, who is the actual integration partner with, I don't know if it's international, you probably know the branding, it's Traton, I guess, ultimately is the owner to all of these. So we'll have a lot more people to talk about trucking, and this is definitely going to take a bigger segment. And look, it's good that they're adding lanes, and we have them adding additional lanes, and they're getting trucks, and there is demand in the marketplace for them. So take nothing away from the fact that I think Aurora can fill that those 100 or 200 trucks, whatever it's going to be next year, which is, again, good signs for the industry.
It's good signs for the industry. And looking out towards 2027, the Torque robotics trucks will be coming on. The Wabi trucks probably in Q4 25, Q1 26. So more and more trucks are coming to the market, which validates this as a growing market.
Wait a minute, did I just hear you say you think Wabi is going to deliver trucks into the market? Have you flipped on that? Because I thought you were a little skeptical about a Wabi delivering trucks. Am I wrong?
Well, news changed this week when we got more details on their Volvo partnership, and all things look to be that partnership looks to be accelerating, and those trucks look to be coming soon. Don't have an exact date yet, but they look to be on the near-term horizon.
Let's shift back to robotaxis and Tesla for a couple of things. One, we did see this week that they expanded the ODD, and I think they're showing a map that's larger than Waymo. Of course, that's kind of weird. Like, it's not really that big of a deal because how many cars are actually in that larger ODD? Not really relevant until you're dropping a couple hundred cars in there, which, as a reminder, we said on our last podcast that we thought they'd be in a couple hundred by the middle of next year in Austin. We got a new software mode, 14.1.4. I will talk very briefly and say it's smoother for me, but what our listeners now want to hear is, Grayson, you actually got FSD 14 and obviously went immediately to 15.1.4. You didn't experience the 1, 2, and 3 jerkiness that maybe I did, but tell us about your experience thus far with FSD 14.1.4.
Mad Max is cool. That's what I'll say. Mad Max is cool. I like it. It is more assertive. It is an overall better driver, not nearly as smooth as 13.2.9. I am getting some phantom braking issues, but it's going into my driveway. It's going into my garage. And it's parking. That's the best part about this. I don't think it's been discussed enough. If you're going to dinner, it finds a spot and parks for you. That is very, very interesting to me. That's like, okay, this is great. My wife's like, all right, I get it now. This technology is accelerating. So overall, very, very good. If it gets as smooth, which I believe it will at some point of 13.2.9, you got a winner on your hands here.
I mean, as our listeners know, I get the parking at the fish store. I've had some more complex parking situations where it didn't excel as well as it should have, where I'm like, it was more of my impatience. I'm like, all right, let's go. Here's how we're getting out of this spot. And in terms of the smoothness, I have a theory in that what I'm calling brake stutter, where it kind of notices something and then it kind of stutters a little bit. By the way, it saved a raccoon the other night because I thought, like, oh my God, we're just doing a big stop. And then, like, this fat ass raccoon just ran across the street. But I had another experience today in New York. We had torrential rain, and I got the alert that my sensors were basically, hidden or obstructed. FSD continues. It just says that it'll be more cautious, and even in the hurry mode, it was driving basically slower. However, what I noticed is, like, there was no brake stutters. So I'm wondering if, like, these brake stutters are that the perception is so much more alert that it notices things and stutters, where now that it actually reduced the visibility in the cameras, that helped to smooth out the overall ride. Again, personal theory is probably not anywhere going to be accurate, but I did notice a difference, unless it just happened to get smoother today, which I don't think that's the way it works. I think we're going to need another software load for an actual change in the smoothness of the ride.
But you bring up the interesting point around perception. Do you know those things when they're doing road work and they put the big piece of metal on when they're not done digging the road before they pave it over? This version now is stopping for that, where 13.29 just drove over it, and it's stopping and recognizing that. And I have noticed it from a perception standpoint. It's starting to pick up things that 13.2.9 did not. So I think you're onto something.
You can just say 13. It's okay. Yeah, and look, Grayson, that metal in the road thing is, if you go back to what I was saying in the fish store, where they had the drainage grate, where it stopped, it backed up, it took a look at it, and then it drove over. That was 14.1 or 2. Now on 14.4, it just goes right over it. It's figured out what it is. I don't know whether it's in the memory or whatever it is, but I think it's doing better at not being as hesitant in those situations.
Yeah, the technology is getting better. Next week, I'm heading out to the Valley. I'm speaking about the autonomy economy at KPMG's M&A Tech Conference, which I'm really excited about. But the best part, Walt, is I'm going to try and fly into San Jose so I could try ride hail. their pickup at the airport, because that's now public. So I'll let you know how that technology works, and I'll see if the safety driver will tell me what version they're running.
And maybe you can see some early construction of that glideways, those glideways lanes. But Grayson, now it's time for our new edition, a regular edition, the Foreign Autonomy Desk. I think we need some like intro music for it. First up on the Foreign Autonomy Desk, we have our good friends at Uber investing in a couple of IPOs. You had these companies when there was discussion of delisting any Chinese-based companies. They said, okay, we're going to IPO in Hong Kong, and Uber has now put money into, who is it, Pony and WeRide on their markets.
So the interesting thing on the Bloomberg was reporting this on the Pony and WeRide IPOs on the Hong Kong exchange. Uber was an investor in their U.S. IPO. So they're going back to the table again, and it's a clear indicator that Uber wants to accelerate the adoption of Chinese robotaxis in Europe.
Nah, I think this is just, hey, this is an existing partner. They're doing an IPO. Let's give them a vote of confidence with this new Hong Kong IPO. I'm not going to read too much into that. Tell me about Baidu expanding in Hong Kong, though. What do we need to know about that?
Baidu is expanding the territories where they can drive and operate. From a licensing perspective, we don't have real insight, but it's just nice to know that they are expanding there in Hong Kong.
It's good to know. Hong Kong effectively controlled by the Chinese anyway. Our friends in Israel are also working on FSD. Do we have information there?
The transportation minister is looking at legalizing FSD in the country, so potentially another country for FSD.
Great. And then finally, we have CEO. By the way, I've ribbed you about your pronunciation of Dara's last name, Khosrowshahi, right? When he was mentioned at the NVIDIA conference, I think Jensen was like, he was about to try and pronounce it, probably read it on the teleprompter, and just like, he goes, Dara K. So I think it's fine. If Jensen can say Dara K, we're going to say Dara K. Dara K was talking about autonomy in Switzerland. What do we have here?
He believes, and from an interview with Politico EU, that's going to be one of Uber's first European markets for rideshare. And getting back to Pony is operating there with Stellantis now, and Pony has an investment from Uber and a relationship. So perhaps that's the first European market for Pony AI and Uber.
Okay, so hold on for a second, because Stellantis is a name that sticks out to me, because we started this podcast talking about how Stellantis was working with NVIDIA, and our perception was that the NVIDIA was the autonomy, the full autonomy stack there. So I guess Stellantis is going to, I guess like Toyota, do a variety of approaches in terms of autonomy.
I think everybody's playing the field at this point to figure out the best partner for the best business economics and who's ultimately going to scale. And we're going to continue to watch who scales each and every week and break it down. And this is my favorite segment. It's Walt time. What do we need to look for in the autonomy markets next week?
Uber and Lyft are reporting, and I can guarantee you there will be a lot of questions about autonomy there. And these companies do additional calls aside from the webcast calls with sell side, and I think if they don't dig into kind of the Waymo situation, what they're really doing with Nuro, I think we'll get those answers offline. So I'll be happy to talk about that next week on the autonomy markets. And by the way, you also have Tesla's annual meeting. So whenever Tesla's able to speak, obviously it's going to be a lot about Elon's pay package, but you never know what additional updates we'll get on autonomy.
We're going to get a lot of updates, and there's probably going to be some great fodder for us to digest from both the Lyft calls and the Uber calls. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is NVIDIA. Walt, until next week.